he was the leader of the apostles or not. We're not going to engage in that controversy that has been settled for thousands of years. So those that are questioning it in this particular century is a century before last century. That is entirely up to them. But we're going to look at the scriptures, because if there is a question about the validity of the ascendance of somebody in such an important position and authority and power, then we may revisit this for a lesson for the future, as the scripture said, not to give a chance. Those that believe in DEI, which is the diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is not a bad thing at all. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is very important and significant in the social justice that we have already preached about and explained in the past. But the problem with that is that you see in the world today, everything that God has done, or everything God does, Satan has a way to make the imitation of it. And you find that his agents always take whatever that is good, in order to make it bad. So by the way they drove it on to the extreme, and in the things that in perversion, just like all the perversions you see coming up now, that everything that is good is perverted. God created man and woman that they shall come together to become one, join to become one, to be a family, for the purpose of establishing the family institution and the marriage institution, which is the likeness of God and the church of his that he has established. But that became perverted, and also so is everything, the imitation of whatever good that God does. So you can see the perversion is generating controversies and debate around the world. And when the perversion happens, the intent is not to promote the goodness of what God himself have established or have called for, but to use that to deny those that God meant to bless by it, so that they will not receive their blessing. So they make it an extreme, and by making them an extreme, then it makes it now difficult to come to become a social harm unto those that it was meant to bless. Because you will see those of the righteous group will now, or on the other side, will now become instead of being able to promote the good that was established, the benefit that is supposed to be a blessing unto the population, we now fight against the extreme, and in fighting the extreme version and the perverted version, they also forget the people that God wanted to touch. So in a way, they all losers. So we want you to look at this, so that as we break this down, that you also know the truth. If God is saying, who have chosen you? What was your commission? How do you know, and how are you supposed to choose people? Because this is something that we must make sure that it doesn't happen in our church. And I know we have taught on this, but I got to retouch it again. There are ways, and I will tell you 7 ways God calls and commissions those that he has called. And I'm going to give you the scriptures, so that you also know how to know who God has called. Because the Lord had already spoken in the prophecy I gave in the past, that the Lord gave to me to give to the world, that majority of the people going around in the world calling themselves men of God are not men of God. God did not call them. An example is Pope Francis that we are talking about right now, which myself is here to explain to you. And number one, where you know who God has called, God, according to the scriptures, calls his own, his servants, by vision. By vision. And you can write it down in the book of Isaiah in chapter 6 from verse 1 to the end. Isaiah chapter 6 from verse 1 to the end. Let's start from the Old Testament to see how the prophets were called, as we know that the prophets were the ones that most of them in the Old Testament relied on to hear from God. And I'm not going to go into Moses and his calling. But if you go to Moses and his calling, you also see that God himself called him. Tending his sheep, walking in the bush, he saw the sign of a leaf that is burning with fire, but the leaves were not harmed or touched. And he approached to find out. The Lord spoke to him directly. The Lord spoke to him directly. And he told him what to do. So you can see God called Moses by himself in person and asked him to come. Take your shoe off, you are standing on a holy ground. And from there, the Lord called him. Then the Lord commissioned him by sending him to Egypt. Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3, from chapter 3 you will read, and as you read from chapter 3 about the calling of Moses, then from verse 10 you will also see